Hey everybody, it's my 40-gallon brackish tank, and I just threw some snails in for Butterbean. He knows they're in there. He's kind of looking around. He's already eaten one of them, so I'm not really sure why he's poking around the way he is. He probably sees me over here shooting video. At any rate, this tank has been undergoing a treatment for the Red Cyanobacteria, and today is day 2 of the treatment. But you can see I've still got some reddish color to the mats that are growing on the substrate down there. So what I'm going to be doing, I don't know if I'm going to get around to doing it tonight or not, but I need to get in there with my siphon hose, not my gravel vac necessarily. I just have a fairly large vinyl hose that I use for doing more major siphon work. I'll actually get in there, and if you see all those white things, those are the broken up pieces of snail shells that are left over when Butterbean's done with them. And I usually get in there and try to gently remove them from the surface. And of course, in this case, I'll use the siphon and I'll try to draw up as much of that red gunk as I can without sucking any of the gravel out of the tank. And once I've done that, and I've done maybe a 10-gallon water change on the tank, I'll probably go ahead and do a second treatment on it, since it doesn't look like I've got everything killed off to begin with. And I've still got the air stone going and everything's all set up and the tank's ready to go, so I may as well just do a second treatment on it. So I did want to just do a brief update here. I'm really surprised Butterbean's not being a little more active with his dinner. I did throw about 6 snails in there, and again, he got one of them, so I know he knows they're in there. He could be just being contrary because he sees me with my camera in my hand, and I don't know why, but he just, after all these years, he still just does not like being in front of this camera. So I also wanted to point out that I had a bit of a scare the other day when I came down here. It was the first day I had set the tank up for treatment, and the reason you have to put the air stone in the tank is because the process of treating the cyanobacteria is actually some sort of oxidation process. I'm not exactly sure what goes on, but I know that a lot of oxygen gets used up in the process, and if you don't have vigorous gas exchange, and I say gas exchange because this is not necessarily pumping oxygen into the tank, it's just creating tons and tons and tons of surface area with fresh air circulating through that water. And that allows for the maximum amount of gas exchange. So if there was extra CO2 building up in the tank, for example, those air bubbles would alleviate that CO2 by allowing for the gas exchange. If the oxygen levels are getting low, the gas exchange will allow for the oxygen levels to be replenished. It's not necessarily pumping oxygen into the tank, though. So having that maximum amount of gas exchange and surface agitation, you really need to keep the tank well aerated while you're using this treatment. Presumably after it's been in there for a few days and it's sort of done its thing, it's lost its oxidizing power, it's probably a little less urgent. But when you first put the treatment in the tank, for that first 24-hour period, it's really burning up the oxygen in the tank. It's really going through it quickly. So it's critical to have a good flow of air bubbles in your tank when you're using this. So I set it up of an evening, 7, 8 o'clock in the evening. And what I did here on the corner is I've got, you see the clothespin there, and I've got the air line going right through the gap in the clothespin. The clothespin prevents the glass lid from pinching it, and then of course going through the gap in the clothespin right there also prevents the airline from being pinched. Well, somehow during the night it slipped and the airline was between the glass and it was pinched. And I came in and turned the lights on, and there was about 3 little teeny tiny bubbles rising up from the air stone. It was just stopped. It was virtually shut off for all intents and purposes. And my heart sunk. The first thing I thought is I'm going to see Butterbean floating up at the top of the tank. And of course the mollies were out and swimming around, and they can just go right up to the surface or whatever. Presumably Butterbean can too, but I just really thought I'd lost him. And then I looked, and sure enough, he was down in the bottom. He was fine. He was just kind of hiding in his cave behind the bubbles. But it took me a long time before I finally was able to spot him hiding behind the bubbles, and it really made me nervous. I thought maybe, again, I'd lost him. I was looking up near the top to see if he was in there floating. So again, big scare, but nothing came of it. I don't know how long ago it had happened, or how long it had been like that before I got to it. But of course, I immediately lifted the lid and got the air bubbles flowing again, and then everything was fine. But as I said, it was a bit of a scare. I also want to point out, while we're looking at this tank here, I don't want to go into too much detail yet because I've still got some experimenting to do. I got a new little project I'm going to be working on with my lighting on this tank. I did have a Finex Stingray for a planted aquarium on this tank, and it was just too much light. It had the red and the blue LEDs in addition to the pure white LEDs, and that's all well and good if you've got a planted tank that is planted with lots of stuff that needs high light requirements. I don't. I've got a tank that's planted with Java fern, which is a very low light plant. And when you've got low light plants, contrary to what some people think, that just because it does well in low light, and boy, if I really flood it with light, it'll do great. That's not necessarily true. It may be, depending on the plant. Some can do okay in low light, but thrive in a lot of light. But a lot of plants, like Anubias and Java fern, need to be in low light. If you put them in really bright, high-intensity light, it's just not good for them. It's too much light, and you'll burn them up. You over-radiate them, effectively. So the really intense planted tank light that I had on here with the additional blue spectrum and the additional red spectrum, which just adds a ton of energy into the plants, might have been contributing to my Java fern not doing really well in this tank. Of course, the brackish water contributes to the Java fern not doing really well in this tank, but that overlighting of it might have had something to do with it too. I also think that the overlighting of it had a lot to do with all that cyanobacteria development. I never had that until about a month and a half or 2 months after I put that really bright light on there, and then I suddenly started developing it. So if you're a regular viewer, you might notice the tank seems a little dimmer than usual. That is because I have at the moment a little makeshift LED on it, and I'm waiting for a few more things to show up in the mail. I thought they were going to be here today, but they did not show up. They're scheduled to be here by Thursday now. So that's a couple more days from now. So hopefully by the end of the week, or maybe this weekend, I'll be tinkering around with the lighting on this tank a little more, maybe brightening it up a little bit, and maybe even tinkering with the color temperature and seeing if I can't come up with a little bit of a custom blend of my color temperatures. I don't want it to be really, really bright white. And when I say bright, I'm saying that in the sense of like a cool white. But at the same time, I don't want it a really soft color either, because that will contribute to algal and cyanobacteria growth, and I don't want that either. So I will be tinkering around with the lights. I guess worst case scenario, I can always put the old fixtures I had on here before. I had a twin T5 fixture on here, but the ballast stopped working. I was going through tubes every 2 months or so. The tubes were burning out, so I can only assume the ballast had gone bad. And that's when I switched over to that Finex Stingray for the planted aquariums. And again, it's just a little too much. And I think what I've got on here right now, which as I said is a little bit makeshift at the moment, is a little too little. This isn't quite enough light on this tank. So I will be tinkering with it. And if you make sure you're subscribed, you won't miss any of that. I don't want to miss too much of Butterbean down here feeding either, but I feel like I've been spending a long time on this video waiting for him to get around to his food. I don't know why he's being so contrary tonight. Again, normally when I put food in there, he's pretty vigorous with the way he eats it. So maybe it's the lighting being different, and the bubbles in the tank have got him a little weirded out and freaked out. And I did just sort of barge and bluster into the room and jump a bunch of snails in his tank, and then started shooting a video and basically shouting in his face, because I've been gone all day, and it's now 8 o'clock at night or something like that, and I'm just now getting down here for the evening. So perhaps I've got him a little freaked out just from my boisterousness right here in front of him. At any rate, if you make sure you're subscribed, you won't miss any of the updates I got coming up, or this tank, or anything else I've got working on. You never know what you're going to get with me. I'm always tinkering with something down here. So don't forget, this one is my brackish tank. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you real soon on the next one.